Simon Kinneen, how are you?
I'm very well. Good to see you, Martin.
Likewise. Look, for the benefit of the audience, it would be great if you wouldn't mind giving a bit of an introduction on yourself, your role. That would be great.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Simon Kinneen. I'm one of the corporate sales leaders here in HubSpot, based out of Dublin, and I manage a sales team that covers the UK and Ireland.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, look, this series is all around Q4, aka business case season. You've seen some of the activity that we're doing, and we're really trying to impress upon the GTM universe just how important this quarter is. But you're in it day in, day out. And I would love, from the perspective of a sales team manager, the senior manager, what does Q4 mean to you, this period?
Yep, Q4, it's the business end of the season. It's really a culmination of all the hard work typically done through sales teams and sales segments around the globe. And I think in many cases, it's a test of predictability. Certainly for sales leaders like myself, you need to have a predictable pipeline, predictable success over the next 3 months. And for general sales teams, it's really about that momentum. Have we built enough momentum now to deliver a sustainable success over the next 3 months? And obviously half of which is going to be wiped out with some annual leave and some of the silly season that comes in every year.
And how do things change if you don't see that momentum yet?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you can change a lot. Some of the conversations that we have with sellers in here is like, what do the best sellers do? And they get ahead of Q4. But similarly, people have done tremendous things over the next couple of months in terms of identifying maybe dormant deals and maybe re-establishing old conversations that have gone unleft, untouched for the last couple of quarters or so. Yeah,
I'd love to be a fly on the wall in your weekly team meetings, just in terms of this period. Does the messaging change in this quarter in those weekly meetings versus in other quarters?
It does. Obviously, things are getting condensed. Whether you're on an annual or a fiscal, you're coming up to the end of your year, where ultimately you need to get into the mindset of triage, ruthless prioritization on your pipeline, and really understanding, okay, well, what's going to deliver you the results in a relatively short amount of time. So if we go back towards the start of a year, it's more strategic thinking, it's more about planning, it's more about setting an operational cadence. And then when we get to a Q4, it's really about that rigor, certainly in my role, understanding what are the deals that I need to make sure that we have resources both inside and outside of sales aligned to those deals.
I love that concept of ruthless prioritization. You're not the first team manager to use exactly that term, and it's a very powerful term because it kind of says it all, right? So is the exercise to meet individually with each one of your AEs and basically go through the list of pipeline deals and kind of filter out, can this feasibly close this quarter, and if it can, prioritize these.
Exactly. We need to put a category on each deal. We need to understand which ones are most likely, which ones are best case. We need to understand on a team level, like, what is our general coverage level? Where's the risks across individuals and specific pockets? And we need to make sure that we get ahead of the ask to internal stakeholders such as legal, solutions engineering, partners, and all of the above. And ultimately, when we have identified, we need to get going. Where do we put our eggs in? Which basket?
It's true, because a lot of the time on that point, the process, it may very well be that the sales rep is very prepared for that, but potentially the buyer doesn't quite understand what are the process to get this deal closed. How do you train your team to make sure that they're ahead of that and they're enabling their buyer to have their ducks in a row?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's why in 2025 and beyond, like, some of the best sellers actually have some of the highest empathy. They'll be able to get into the mind's eye of our consumer, whether an existing customer or a prospect, and they'll understand that while that deal might be tremendously important on our side, on the prospect and the customer side, ultimately that could be just a project on a long list of things that need to be done with competing priorities. So certainly when we're looking at deals and trying maybe re-establishing some momentum on it, because Q4 is all about momentum, as we talked about, it's really important to identify how we can get into that value mindset with the specific deals, not falling down the traps that many sellers do in the past and future of throwing discounts over the table and really just chasing people for check-in meetings and things like that, which have very little value to anybody.
I was going to say, in the same way that we recognize the importance of Q4, the savvy buyer will also recognize the importance of Q4 and equally the importance individually of the sales rep wanting to hit their numbers. How do you train or coach your reps to manage the pressure that they may be getting to discount or to maybe offer things, that as an organization you may not be willing to offer, but equally want to close a deal?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a difficult one. Sales is very much a performance role. So there is a lot of pressure on sellers around the globe at the moment. The macro conditions that we see this year and into next year, it's caused a little bit of a squeeze. However, and yes, good companies like HubSpot and many others, they find their way through, and the best sellers will always try and find the way to success. I think the conversation really needs to continue to go back to value, why we're speaking in the first place, what are the challenges and the problems we're trying to solve. And really if we're thinking about business cases, it fundamentally shifts from more maybe a strategic document that we're looking at early in the year to more of a vision of the answer of why now and why should we change now rather than into the future. So it very much becomes kind of a tactical procurement conversation that we need to have rather than a more strategic.
Yeah, makes sense. And in scenarios where, maybe for whatever reason, the momentum hasn't been there or the pipeline isn't as strong into Q4, how much of Q1 do you try to pull forward? Is that a technique that's used as your first kind of port of call?
It is. I think the first port of call really should be looking at what we have in Q4. Do we have the coverage? If we do, brilliant. As I said, we get into that triage mode where there might be pockets within the sales org where we have gaps. Naturally, we should be looking to Q1 and see, okay, which ones can we accelerate with different tactics that we might employ. But it's also really important to not sacrifice some of the process that you have and not sacrifice maybe the win rate on that deal that is legitimately not going to happen until the next year or the next quarter. And as I said, the best sellers will be way ahead of that already.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, you've been across a number of different companies in your long, illustrious career in sales. I'm sure you've seen it pretty much all. What is the craziest thing that you've seen a sales rep do to get a deal closed by end of quarter?
Lots of things. I've seen literally deals closed, close to 10, 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve at times. I've worked in very large organizations as well, where once you get the yes from a prospect or customer that's also not in, you need to navigate the internal contracts and deals teams as well. I had one particular seller who was really, really good at what they did, and they were selling an extraordinarily complex project across, several lines of business on this global company. And they actually got the yes from the prospect at the start of December, but it took multiple weeks to get that contract over the line. And in fact, it was very much last minute internally here. And, thankfully they were working hard over that Christmas and almost to the New Year's period. But that was always eye-opening when you get the yes from the prospect or customer. Sometimes it's still not the win, which was pretty crazy.
Totally. I've actually, on that point, I've actually seen and heard that the verbal commit is very different across regions and cultures.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that is I've seen that in the UK, for instance, and possibly in Ireland. I'd love your thoughts on it. A verbal commit will come all the way very, very close to the end of a deal, which means that it's a very commit verbal yes, where that then it's just a question of getting the signatures. Whereas in other markets, in the US, for instance, that verbal commit can come on, early in the deal cycle, and it's not as committed as one would want or as written in stone. What's been your experience across cultures with commitment?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure. And I think, one of the things that I do with certainly any new hires and new sellers that I work with in my sales teams is to make sure that we have clarity on what a commit and most likely in a best case is based on our experience. Make sure we get into an area of trust. However, there are cultural differences within the UK and Ireland. I would say, people tend to have the tendency of harder to say no, especially here in Ireland. So a verbal commit or a verbal yes with an Irish account would mean far less than it would be with, for example, my experience in Nordics or even with the UK and London. And it's why, again, the sellers must go wide into the account and get a shared commitment rather from that one champion, because human beings are human beings and things can change quite rapidly.
So when you're in your weekly meeting and one of your reps says, yeah, got the verbal commit, what do you do to to confirm that that is as reliable a commit as you would like? What do you ask them to go and get?
Yeah, well, first off, we need to make sure we've done our due diligence, given the product and the services that we sell, that we've gone through our terms of services, we've got the legal and the technical yes, not just the commitment from someone that they want to join HubSpot. We also need to ensure from a services standpoint as well and a project deliverability, we're aligned there. Obviously, that's equally important as the actual product or service that they're going to purchase. And usually in that conversation, you'll be able to spot the weak points. And usually it's the common trap that we have these days is, we're not speaking to enough people. Sometimes we speak to the right people, but we're not speaking to enough people. And it's just too risky having that isolated yes.
Yeah, especially if we all want a champion, but if you're only speaking to the champion, you never see really what could be going on behind the scenes. What are the biggest blockers in late stage deals in Q4? Is it the process, the lack of clarity in terms of stakeholders, or are there any other key blockers?
Like it's almost always what I describe as like organizational inertia. There might be legal, security, procurement teams that are overwhelmed. People get very busy. It's Q4 for us, but it might be Q4 for the prospect or customer as well, and they get busy with their end of year tasks. We have the annual leave and the holiday season as well, which can get in the way. I think definitely front loading any of the administrative friction that a rep might experience in the deal is really important, but also making sure that we've made it easy for that buyer to be confident and happy with the yes, whether it's themselves or going to a board or C-suite. And things like SIMBI and business cases can be tremendously valuable in terms of presenting and co-presenting that value.
Yeah, and we always like to say, at least with a SIMBI or a business case, that the best rule of thumb is if your champion is not your economic buyer, you will always need a business case, right? A lot of the time, the sales reps, the ones that are probably less versed in value selling, they won't realize that that's going to happen at one point or another in the deal. And sometimes it can come too late. Basically, if your champion comes back to you and says, I need a business case, it's because the economic buyers are scrutinizing the deal.
Yep.
And that's a risky moment in time.
100%. We see the friction on our side of the fence selling and how difficult it is to get some momentum. But equally, if you're a stakeholder and you're trying to get a product or service to improve your core KPIs and move your teams or organizations forward, you're also going to come across that friction in terms of securing budget. So again, having the empathy to understand that a deal is a shared opportunity, really, if it's done right, is really, really important these days.
Yeah, totally get it. Well, look, Simon, this has been really, really enlightening and insightful. I really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin.